I sold both of my properties and I went all in. I have more reliable income from my passive investing than I ever did active.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. I'm your host, Jeremy DYER. Thank you again for joining us on another fantastic episode. I have an amazing guest with me today, Verna Staggers. Verna, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeremy. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and thank you so much for spending some time with us today. It's currently 60 degrees outside, a little chilly, but it's a nice fall day up here in Minnesota. I trust that's the case where you're at as well today.
It's a little dreary here in the DC area, but it's about the same.
Yep, 'tis the season, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, good. Well, I would like to let my audience know a little bit more about you, and then I will have you tell more of your story. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Great. So Verna is a limited partner investor in 17 passive real estate deals and an equity investor in $350 million in total assets. She's passionate about HR consulting, wealth building, and leveraging passive income to escape the chains of corporate America and achieve financial independence. That said, Verna, I know there's a lot more to your story, so I'm just going to let you take over and tell us more about what you're up to.
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. So as you said, I have over 15 years of HR leadership experience from global companies across several industries. I focus mainly on helping organizations attract, engage, and retain talent, spanning consulting, tech, and financial services. But I've always had a passion for financial independence, and I started out as an active investor, just literally dipping my toe in the water through renting out my condo that I lived in. So I just turned it into a rental. And it was pretty easy. And I thought, maybe I could do more of this. And so I did that for 2 years, a couple years. And then I continued to have full-time work. I continued to climb the corporate ladder. And then I would also go to these investment clubs on Saturday mornings at 8 o'clock. I know, I would drag myself there. It was only monthly. And it was mostly like informational. Every once in a while there would be a networking opportunity at the end, but I really would just sit there and just listen to what they had to say, but it was really uneventful. And then one day, somebody came and spoke about multifamily investing, and I just lit up. They were talking about this concept of being able to charge per door what I was charging for an entire building. And I remember thinking, light bulb, that's what I need to be doing. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't have any money. I didn't know what to do, but that's when the light bulb kind of went off for me in terms of multifamily. So a couple years went by. I continued to focus on my job, but that light bulb, that seed still stayed there. And then so in 2011, while I was climbing the corporate ladder, I saved my little corporate bonuses at the end of the year. And it's funny, and I was telling this story to someone else, it's funny, you could always tell when this company paid bonuses because the parking garage looked like a car show. People would show off their cars, they would rev the engine really fast, and they would drive around. That's how you could always tell they were paying their bonuses. But I was in my little beat up car, and I would just take my little bonus and put it in the bank because I wanted to buy an apartment building. So I did that. In 2011, I bought my first 4-unit apartment building. And then eventually I did another one the next year, and it turned into 2. So I owned them for a total of 10 years as an active investor. And anything that could happen and go wrong went wrong. So the pipes would burst. I was sued multiple times. My property manager stole from me. Somebody died in one of the apartments. It was just, I remember just one day sitting in court in my little pantsuit, having to take PTO from my job. And I'm sitting there in landlord-tenant court, and I'm looking around and listening to the stories. And I remember thinking, what am I doing? Like, this is not what I went to school for. This is not me. Like, this is too stressful. And I was working 55 hours a week. And I just sure something is not right here. Um, and so I started to think, what can I do to convert these assets? I know they're assets. I know I have something here, but I'm not making any money. Like, what can I do to convert this to like infinite wealth? Like, that's the question that I would ask myself. And I truly believe, and I think Tony Robbins said this, when you ask questions, your mind actually finds answers. Like, I really believe that. You can call it like, you'll meet people, or you'll see something written, or a blog post or an article from you or something. But that happened with me. I don't know if it's serendipity or whatever, but that's what happened. I kept asking that question. And then in 2021, I was on Bigger Pockets, and I was networking in the forum, and I met someone who told me about real estate syndications. I think she was a broker, but she took the time to explain it to me. She broke it down, and, returns and all of that. And so in 2021, I sold both of my properties, and I went all in 100% into passive investing. And it was scary as heck. But I also remembered being scared when I bought my first apartment building. So I thought, hey, everything that could happen happened. This can't be as risky as what I was already doing. And I have to say, I have more reliable income from my passive investing than I ever did active. Like, I barely had enough money to pay the mortgage note at the end of the month. And now I'm getting these returns, and they're reliable. I don't have to sit in landlord-tenant court. I don't have to take PTO for my job. And it's amazing. And I just have to share, I was getting really discouraged because I've always believed that real estate was the path to wealth. And it has been for centuries. I've always believed that. But I also remember, Robert Kiyosaki said, assets feed you, liabilities eat you. And he was explaining the difference. And I remember thinking, like, this asset's eating me. It's not feeding me. Like, an asset is supposed to put food on the table when you can't work. These assets weren't doing that for me. I had to literally go to work just to have these buildings, and I knew something was wrong. So anyway, it just, I enjoy my career. I'm good at it. But as I get older, I want more time, and I want more time freedom. And there's just more to the 401k and the IRA. And I know that a lot of people like me in the corporate world don't know that. And you really can increase your financial independence.
Yeah, Verna, your story, when you told it to me a couple of weeks ago, it sounded like a mirror image of my own story. And most people that know me personally or have listened to this podcast can attest to that being the truth. Okay. Your story of crushing it in your day job in corporate America to dabbling in active real estate ownership. You just happen to own, a couple of 4-unit properties. I was fixing and flipping houses, right? And dealing with slinging hammers on the weekends, to then, learning about passive real estate investing through syndication because somebody was willing to take the time to educate you, on that investment strategy. And then now, fast forward to today, you're an LP investor in 17 deals. You now know the true impacts that it can have, on somebody's ability to build generational wealth. And now you're in a position to want to be able to share your own story, to impact others. So really appreciate, that kind of background. Anything more that you'd like to add? If not, I've got some questions for you.
Sure. Jump right in.
Sounds good. So I know that most of the LP investments, or all of the LP limited partner investments that you've made, have been with, one or multiple sponsors. How do you go about finding which sponsors would make sense to deploy capital into and to invest into their deals?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, and I just want to say I'm still evolving and learning like you, but really looking at the track record of the sponsors, looking at how many deals they've had that have gotten full cycle. I've also been, I look at how their loans are structured and what contingency plans they'll have if things go south. So really, I've had 2 or 3 operators. So I tend to, when I find something good, I tend to just stay there and dig in. So I've had a few sponsors that I've been very happy with.
That's great. What are some questions that you would advise the individual that maybe is new to this type of an investment strategy, maybe they've invested into a deal or two and they're looking to take it to the next level, or maybe they've never even invested passively into a real estate syndication before. What are some of the questions that that individual should be asking of the sponsor or asking of the deal itself before they decide to invest?
Yeah, great question. I think as similar to what I just said, like really understanding their track record, how many deals they've taken full cycle, what investment options they have. Like, do you really need just passive income, or do you want to participate in equity growth? Because it really varies by individual. Personally, I like both. And then just how the loan is structured. How do they communicate? I'm with a sponsor right now. When I call him, he calls me back within one day, and I know he's busy. I see him on his, but that communication makes me sleep better at night. Are they giving you monthly reporting? Are they giving you, quarterly reporting? Are you going to get a monthly dividend or distribution? Or some sponsors do quarterly distributions. So those types of questions based on kind of what your needs are and what, I love communication. So that's big for me. I also need monthly distributions, but that's me. So it depends on what your desires are.
Yeah, you had mentioned a little bit earlier that there's a difference between like an investor that wants to invest and receive only a preferred return versus an investor that maybe wants to participate with a preferred return, but with some equity profit split, right? That they would receive, maybe at the end when that deal goes full cycle. Are you comfortable enough explaining kind of the differences between, those two types of investors that might have that opportunity to passively invest?
Sure, I can take a stab at it. And so the let's say that you are a little bit more risk averse. And let me just say, all investments carry risk. Nothing is 100%. Even if you leave it in the bank, it's risky because inflation will erode it. But anyway, I digress. So nothing's risk free. But if you want a little bit more of if you're more conservative, they Class A is what it's typically referred to, and you get a preferred return. Some operators 9%, some operators are 10%. But you sit right in the equity stack. You sit right behind the lender, but you don't participate in the equity growth. So if you have a property that does really well, and you have it's equity multiple of, I don't know, 1.5, you don't get any of the upside. You just get that 10% preferred return. In exchange for a lower preferred return, maybe 5 to 7%, you can participate in the upside, which may happen 4, 5, 6 years later, but you get a lower monthly distribution. I hope I did justice to that explanation.
No, I think that's great, and I'm glad that you kind of highlighted it in the way that you expressed that to the listening audience. My question is are all deals that you're currently participating in, is that preferred return? Is that a cumulative preferred return? The reason why I ask that question is because sometimes operators may not be able to pay out the 7% preferred return annually, in the first couple of years because they need really all cash on hand, to implement their value add business plan. So if year one, for example, that cash on cash return, is 4.5 or 5%, but the deal is communicating a 7% preferred return, are the deals that you're in today, is that preferred return cumulative?
Great question, Jeremy. And yes. And so what that means is, due to the environment, if they pay, say, a 4% distribution, they will catch me up by the end of that deal. And so in the end, I will be made whole, and it will equate to that 7% preferred return. But yeah, that's a great question.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you for that. What are some maybe red flags that our audience should be on the lookout for, as maybe they're evaluating, different opportunities to invest passively into real estate deals? Are there any particular things that you look for, in either the, pro forma or the deal presentation itself or with the sponsor? What are maybe some red flags that people could be on the lookout for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I like to keep it pretty simple. If they are promising guarantees, if they are guaranteeing a certain return, that's a red flag because, again, all of these investments carry risk. And so nothing is 100% guaranteed. So that's a red flag. I would say, what else? What else is a red flag? If they haven't taken any deals full cycle. The market has been extraordinary the last couple of years. And so everyone seems to be getting in the game. And some are more experienced, some are not. But if they've taken a deal full cycle, they kind of know like what the adversities can be versus someone who's new to this and they have a lot of deals, but they haven't completed any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a couple of other ones out there that I personally like to look out for. Obviously, you mentioned this earlier, but that's the way that they structure their debt, right? I think a lot of operators in the space that acquired assets back in late 2020, 2021 and early 2022, if they got a floating rate bridge loan, for example, without a rate cap, they're really struggling, I think, right now, to make those, to meet that debt service payment, right? So I definitely look at that. And then another one, and I'm not sure if this is kind of in your, list of criteria as well, but I do tend to like to partner with sponsors that are vertically integrated on the property management side and the building construction
Yes,
side. Yeah.
it's a good one. Yes.
Yeah, it just to me it helps me understand that really the property management company's goal, if it's vertically integrated, is it should be a nonprofit, right? The idea
Mm-hmm.
is for the property management company within the sponsorship, is really designed to break even. And on the building construction side, I like that side to be vertically integrated as well because labor is expensive, right? The cost of labor, the cost of turnover, the cost of materials, supply chain issues, all those types of things are really important, for me when I personally vet out sponsors. So thank you for sharing that. So I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is a real simple answer, but the 17 deals that you're invested into as a limited partner, are they all multifamily? And if so, why not other asset classes?
Yes, great question. They all are multifamily. I have looked at self storage, and that is on the horizon for my next investment. But the deal hasn't made sense yet for me. But I am interested in that space. But yes, multifamily. Currently, it's all multifamily.
Great. As an investor, do you typically prefer investments that have a, shorter time frame, maybe a 2 to 5 year projected hold, versus maybe something that's more like a build to rent, right? Where it's ground up development and the projected hold time might be anywhere from 5 to 8 years or, even up to 10 years.
Yeah. So as I've climbed the corporate ladder, my goal has always been, how can I not have to work again ever if I choose to?
You like
And
cash flow.
yeah, I want the cash flow as soon as I possibly can. So the buy to rent or build to rent, probably not for me. I'm looking for a timeline of mostly 3 to 5 years.
Okay, great. One other question that I have for you is what investment challenges have you personally encountered along the way? And I'm not specifically speaking about your multifamily investment strategy. Okay. Any investment strategies where maybe lessons have been learned. I'm going to set this up for you. Okay. I've got a 16-year-old son that reads a book a week about investing, entrepreneurial stuff, mindset, right? He's just absorbing everything he possibly can, right? So put yourself back now into your 16-year-old self or 18-year-old self, right? What are maybe some of the investment or what is one investment mistake maybe that you've made that you've since regretted? But because of that mistake, it's also shaped the way that you invest in the future.
Wow, that's a great question. I think that, when I think about my investments, I made a lot of mistakes. But real estate in itself, in my opinion, is a pretty safe bet in terms of asset classes. But I went into it thinking that it would be easy peasy if I had a property manager and I wouldn't have to do anything and they would take that turned out not to be true. You still have to manage the manager. You still have to take the phone calls. So I think the unrealistic expectations was a challenge. But that said, even my worst investment turned out to be okay because it was invested in a strong asset class.
Yeah. How can others like yourself? So I'm thinking about we'll call it the corporate refugee. Okay. or the individual that has that, full dependence on the W-2 and can't escape it. Okay. What type of advice would you have for that corporate refugee, that dependent W-2 worker, on some steps that they can start taking today to either educate themselves or to kind of start taking some of those steps like you have?
Yeah, I would say be curious and open your mind and seek out other opportunities. And like me, it will come. There's. I used to think it was only okay. I invested my max out my 401k and then everything will be okay. But that's fine. But that's going to take a while. So I would seek out forums. I would seek out others who are already doing it. I would research and I would be open minded, because just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that it's not viable and it doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. How have your personal priorities changed as you've gotten older?
I think for me now, it's about time freedom, and really wanting to choose how I spend my time, choose who I spend my time with, and having the luxury to do that. It really is a luxury. And that's becoming more and more important for me as I get older.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen the same thing in my own life, right? It's amazing when you think back to your, early 20s and how your priorities, change, 3 decades later. It's pretty remarkable, and it's something that it's constantly changing, right? My priorities in my mid 40s are different than my priorities in my mid 30s, and I'm sure when I get into my mid 50s and 60s, right, my priorities are going to certainly change then. But the one thing that I always come back to that's most important, is really the time spent, right, with family and spending
Yes.
time on activities that we enjoy, right. Somebody had once told me that you're never going to remember the big purchases you made, but you're always going to remember the money you spent on experiences, right? And more
Right.
often than not, those experiences aren't on your own. They're with other people, people that you want to genuinely spend, time with, and oftentimes that's our own families.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, great. So, a question for you: if you had $1 million in cash sitting on the sidelines, stuffed underneath your mattress, uh, where would you put that money today? And it doesn't always have to be into multifamily. I'm kind of, the genesis of the question is are you diversifying money into other asset classes or other investments outside of just multifamily?
I would first figure out how can I multiply it. That would be the first question. And then I would, yes, absolutely seek opportunities outside of multifamily, and probably business opportunities that give me energy and that I have passion towards. But I think number one is I would try to figure out how do I multiply this versus spend it down.
Yeah, absolutely. What is one or two ways that you use your personal or professional talents to give back to others?
Yeah, great question. So I like to help others with interview tips. Having been an insider for so many years, I can tell you what they're really saying when you go for that interview behind your back. Um, Helping others negotiate salaries, resume writing, and as well as spreading the good news about passive income and what it can do for you.
Oh, that's great. What are one or two maybe books or podcasts that you would recommend to the investor that's looking to learn more?
I think the book that I would recommend, I don't know if you're aware of this, it's called Cash Flow Quadrant
Hmm.
by Robert Kiyosaki. I think it's the second or third book in the Rich Dad series. And that also turned the light on for me because he talks about the four different ways of making money as a W 2, as a self employed person, and then on the left side and on the right side as a business owner, and then as an investor. And that really, and all of those ways are taxed differently. And so, if you have a second, I got to tell you a story about this real quick. I lived that. So, when I had a property manager at the end of the year, one year, he sent me the tax forms at the end of the year and he coded it wrong. He put independent contractor. The way that he coded it, it looked like I was a self employed person,
Sure.
not a passive income investor. And my accountants flagged it and she said, you need to get him to change that, Verna, because that's gonna give you problems down the road. I was working 55 hours a week. I didn't have time. I just let it go. So at the end of the year, I get this scary letter from the IRS, and they said, you made money that you underreported. And I think it was like, I don't know, $20,000 in passive income. And because you didn't pay taxes on it, you owe, and it had this huge number, like $12,000 by tomorrow. And I just freaked out. I was like, oh my God, And so what I ended up doing is I sent them a letter. I showed them the leasing agreement. I basically had to prove I did not earn this money actively. I got it passively. And so I was nervous, and I waited, and they responded in like 10 days. And they sent me a letter, and it said, we reviewed your file, you owe, and I scrolled down and it said $0.00. And that made an impression, Jeremy, because that's what Kiyosaki talks about in Cash Flow Quadrant. If you earn $150,000, which I would prefer to earn $150,000 on the right side of the quadrant passively, then earn $150,000 working at W-2, because I get to keep more of it.
Yep. We've heard it said before, it's not about what you make as much as it is about what you keep, right? So a couple of other takeaways that I heard you say, number one is if you don't have an accountant that understands how passive real estate investing works, then find a different accountant. The second one is your book recommendation, Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. I would agree that's an excellent book. I recommend it to all listeners. We will put the name of that book in our show notes, okay?
Awesome.
Yeah. What is the next item on Verna's bucket list that she's looking to check off?
I've always wanted to write a book. Never done it yet, never had time. So that's probably next. I have a lot to say, and I would love to just get it out of my head and put it down. So yeah.
What are a couple of ways that our listening audience can reach out to you to learn more about what you're up to?
Sure. You can reach me at vstaggers@hotmail.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Verna Staggers. I think I'm the only one on there. So you can also reach me on LinkedIn as well.
Great. Verna, I've really appreciated having you on the show today. Thank you for all the tremendous value that you've brought our listening audience. Okay.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah. And for listening audience, thank you again for joining us on another episode of the Freedom Point podcast. Look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.